All right, what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick Shine the Power. So I wanted to do a review of the movie Bigger, which is basically the story of Ben and Joe Weider and the foundation of the IFBB as we know it today. Now, Bigger was recently released on streaming platforms for purchase, such as Amazon Prime and iTunes, where you can pay about $12.99 or $15 to watch the movie. And a lot of people were asking me to do a video review so they would know whether or not it was worth paying for, or if they should wait for it to come out on a free streaming service like Netflix or Hulu. So a little bit of background about the movie Bigger. The movie is based essentially on this book, Brothers of Iron, which is basically the Joe and Ben Weider story about the foundation of the IFBB, their relationship, their childhood, their upbringing, and really the struggles they faced early on in business, trying to get this whole bodybuilding thing off the ground. Now, I'm going to go ahead and play the trailer for you guys here so you can get an idea of what this movie is about. But basically, it goes through Joe and Ben Weider's childhood. The focus is more specifically on Joe Weider rather than Ben Weider. And really, the beginning of the movie is Joe Weider being interviewed at his brother's funeral. So it's more heavily focused on Joe and the creation of the IFBB. So it talks about their childhood. It starts to focus on Joe. His first marriage, his first wife is played by Victoria Justice. Then it goes to focus on his second marriage, how he meets Betty Weider, who is played by Julianne Hough. Obviously, you have the role of Arnold Schwarzenegger being played by Callum von Moger. But more interesting here is the character Bill Hawke. Now, Bill Hawke is actually a fictional character in this movie, but he's a very, very important character in this movie, and he's really heavily focused on all throughout this movie. So this is the guy that's basically the key enemy or the key rival to Joe Weider. He's an anti-Semitic guy. He's got a rival publishing company to Joe Weider. He's got a rival group of bodybuilders to Joe Weider's group of bodybuilders. And he really plays a very important role in this movie. And when I was reading some of the negative reviews of this movie, if you guys go over to Rotten Tomatoes actually gives this movie a 20%, the average rating being a 3.7 out of 10. Now, when you read some of the actual reviews here, a lot of the negative reviews are coming from a standpoint of people saying that there's a lot of historical inaccuracies in this movie. And I think, to me, the biggest historical inaccuracy would be this Bill Hawke character. The fact that this character never existed but plays such a major dominant role in this movie is the key thing that stands out to me in this movie. Now, I did really enjoy the movie, but going back to this Bill Hawke guy who is played by Kevin Durand, who's actually one of my favorite actors, I think this character is really an amalgamation of a bunch of guys or multiple guys from Joe Weider's past. I think specifically Bob Hoffman, who was the founder of York Barbell. Joe Weider also started a barbell company, Weider Barbell, very early on. And Bob Hoffman also had a rival publication to Joe Weider's publication around the same time that Joe Weider really started to take off. So I think this Bill Hawke character could be representative in some aspects of Bob Hoffman. Now, another guy from Joe Weider's past that I think this could be representative of is actually Dan Laurie. Now, Dan Laurie was a guy that a lot of people would say, there was a big controversy with who actually created or trademarked the name IFBB, International Federation of Bodybuilders. And the one guy that people say could have actually trademarked it was Dan Laurie. Now, there's a lot of controversy between Dan and Joe, so maybe they couldn't specifically say the name Dan Laurie in this movie for maybe legal reasons. And Dan Laurie was the guy in Joe Weider's past that had rival bodybuilding competitions, rival groups of bodybuilders. He was good friends with Sergio Oliva. So that could be where the competitive aspect of being a rival promoter came from in this Bill Hawke character. Now, if you go over to IMDb, the movie actually got a lot better reviews on IMDb, averaging a 6.6 out of 10 with 854 total reviews coming in. Now, the movie is available for purchase on Amazon Prime and iTunes. Again, I believe it was about $12.99 to purchase this movie. I did buy it. I did watch it. I actually watched it twice. I watched it once just for my own enjoyment. Then I watched it again right before making this video just to get a better idea of what I wanted to talk about here. So I think overall, the key things to be looking for when it comes to this movie is the overall casting. I think the casting was very good. You had very big name actors in this movie, or relatively big name actors like Julianne Hough, Kevin Durand, Victoria Justice, even though they had kind of minor roles. But I think in the bodybuilding community, the main reason why people wanted to watch this movie was for Callum von Moger playing the role of a young Arnold Schwarzenegger. A lot of people wanted to see how well Callum would be able to capture the essence of a young Arnold. Now, the thing that I think is probably going to disappoint a lot of people is there wasn't a very big Arnold-centric storyline in this movie. Arnold didn't have that big of a role. Callum didn't have that big of a role, and he had very, very limited speaking roles. But the speaking roles that he did have, I will say I think he did a very good job of capturing the Arnold accent in those roles. I think he did a very good job with that accent. Obviously, facially and from a physique standpoint, he looked very, very similar to a young Arnold Schwarzenegger, so I think he did a good job in that aspect. I think overall the movie is worth a watch. The casting, the production, these are things that you typically don't see in a bodybuilding-themed movie. Bodybuilding-themed movies don't get money and budgets like this movie got. Bodybuilding-themed movies don't get actors like this movie got. So I think overall, as a bodybuilding movie, I would give it like an 8 or 9 out of 10. I do think it's a movie that a lot of bodybuilding fans will enjoy watching. There may have been some historical inaccuracies in the movie, but overall it was still very enjoyable. I still learned some things that I didn't know prior to watching the movie. And I consider myself a bodybuilding historian myself, a bodybuilding fan myself, and I still learned some things from watching this movie. So I think in that regard, it was worth the $12.99 or $15, depending on where you buy it. So it was a good movie, and I would suggest that if you were on the fence of watching this movie and on the fence of paying for this movie, it's worth the $12.99. It's a good movie. It gives you a little bit of insight into how the IFBB was created. Now, from a negative review standpoint, I think a lot of these negative reviews are probably not coming from bodybuilding fans. These are probably coming from mainstream film critics that aren't really familiar with bodybuilding in general, that aren't really familiar with the IFBB, and maybe didn't even know who Joe Weider was prior to watching this movie. Now, the other criticism that I would say is it's kind of a accelerated version of a biography of Joe Weider. It tells the story, but it doesn't tell it that deep. It kind of shows you the surface of the story, but it doesn't really go that deep into each segment of the story. I think, again, that's probably for the standpoint of making it actually fit into a 2-hour window, which, again, is why I think they had this Bill Hawke character represent these multiple guys, possibly, and Bob Hoffman and Dan Laurie, rather than giving a storyline to Bob Hoffman, then giving a separate storyline to Dan Laurie. I think for the sake of streamlining the movie into 2 hours is probably why they made that choice of creating this fictional character. So overall, I did enjoy it. I would recommend it. Let me know in the comment section below if you guys have seen this movie, what you thought of it. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Would you recommend it? I hope this video kind of helped you guys decide whether or not to buy it. Please give this video a thumbs up if you did enjoy it. Nick Strength and Power, signing out.